But Lincoln is an experienced operator, and he knows that there's this grumbling against Grant. So what he does is the Secretary of War comes up with a plan to put a spy in Grant's headquarters, and Lincoln signs off on this. So what happens is a guy by the name of Charles Dana, who had been a newspaper man and he was working for the War Department, he's sent to Grant's headquarters along the Mississippi to check on how supposedly this was the cover story, that he was checking on payroll issues, how men were getting paid. Um, and now at this point, it's probably important to note that Grant has moved his headquarters from Memphis to the area of the Mississippi in Louisiana, which the Union controlled. And of course, the Union Navy still controls the area of the Mississippi north of Vicksburg as well. So Grant has moved the bulk of his men across the river from Vicksburg, and that's where his headquarters are. So he's in the vicinity of Vicksburg, although it's no closer to being captured. So Dana goes down to this position, and Grant's a smart guy. He doesn't get, I think, the credit for his intelligence. And Grant can see through this subterfuge. He knows what's going on. And he does something very smart. Instead of giving Grant Dana rather, the cold shoulder, which I think a lot of us would have done. I mean, the guy's a spy, right? For the Lincoln administration. What Grant does, because really he didn't have anything to hide, is he welcomes Dana with open arms. He lets Dana talk to all his staff. He tells his staff to talk to Dana, to welcome him. And Dana just decides that Grant hung the moon. He really becomes a big fan of Grant. And he later said that Grant is the most modest, the most disinterested, and the most honest man I ever knew, with a temper that nothing could disturb. So that's pretty high praise. The most modest, the most honest man I ever knew, with a temper that nothing could ever disturb. So Dana decides that Grant is the man for the job, and he sends these messages back to Washington. You can trust Grant. He's doing everything he can. He'll make this work. So the spy that the Lincoln administration sent down to check on Grant actually ended up supporting Grant and reinforcing his position with the president. Now, the Confederates, by the spring of '62, were very, very confident that Grant was going to fail. They thought he was going to move his whole army back to Memphis, that Vicksburg was safe, and that the Union Army, there was no way that they could capture this position. Right about the time that Grant is coming up with his scenario, his plan to take Vicksburg, the Vicksburg paper wrote that the gunboats, Union gunboats, are all more or less damaged, the Union men dissatisfied and demoralized. There's no immediate danger here. But as so often happened, Grant had been underestimated. So he comes up with a plan, and here's his plan. This is how Grant finally takes Vicksburg. And I'll try not to get too much in the weeds here, but it's a pretty amazing plan, and it's a plan that he's really, really thinking out of the box. Okay, so what does Grant do? The first thing that Grant does is he marches his men on the Louisiana side of the Mississippi River to a position, a place called Hard Times, on the Louisiana side of the Mississippi River. Okay, well, what's the advantage of that? They still have to cross this major river, and they're going to need Navy gunboats to do it. And the thinking would be that Navy gunboats couldn't come south of Vicksburg. They couldn't come from north to south on the Mississippi River because they would have been attacked by the artillery at Vicksburg. Now, very briefly, the reason that Union gunboats couldn't come north up the Mississippi River was that there was a smaller position south of Vicksburg that stopped them. I just don't want to like boggle you with too many details. But the point is that Grant has to figure out how to get his men across the Mississippi River. And it doesn't seem like there's any way to do it because he can't get his transports, his Union transports, the Navy transports that would transport the men, he can't get them either north up the Mississippi River in the Vicksburg area or south. But Grant takes a gamble. Grant decides that the artillery at Vicksburg is overrated. That in fact he probably can float his transport vessels past Vicksburg, going from north to south. This is one of his real insights, and this is a real gamble that he takes. So what he does is, after he orders his army to move down the Louisiana side of the Mississippi River and to position themselves south of Vicksburg, what he does is he orders the Union Navy to float transport vessels in front of Vicksburg, and their assignment is to float past Vicksburg and then to meet up with the Union Army on the Louisiana side of Mississippi River and transport them across the Mississippi River. Nobody believes that Grant can do this. Nobody believes that the gunboats can float past Vicksburg. Not the gunboats, the transports can float past Vicksburg. But Grant, even Sherman says to Grant, look, you're my buddy, but this will not work. This is crazy. So again, just to repeat, here's what Grant comes up with. He decides to float. He orders his army south of Vicksburg, but they're still in Louisiana, and they still have to cross the Mississippi River, which is a major obstacle. And Grant has decided that he can float naval transports past Vicksburg and that they will survive, that the Vicksburg artillery will not sink these boats. And so on April 16th, 1863, this is what Grant does. It's a very dramatic moment in the history of the Civil War. And actually, Grant is watching this from a Union gunboat, and his wife is with him, and his child is with him as well. And long story short, Grant's gamble pays off. He is able to float enough Union transports. In fact, I think only one was sunk. And then he does it a couple of nights later. So Grant is right. The Union Navy transport vessels are floated past Vicksburg, and they survive. They don't get sunk. And they're able to meet Grant's army south of Vicksburg. So here's the key point. Grant now finally has figured out a way to get his men from Louisiana across the Mississippi River into the state of Mississippi. Okay, what he's done, I'll repeat it one more time. He's marched his army south of Vicksburg, but they're still in Louisiana. They're on the Mississippi River, but they're still in Louisiana. In mid-April of 1863, he floats Union transports past the Vicksburg artillery, and they make it just fine, and they manage to meet the Union troops, which have marched south of Vicksburg. And now the question becomes, where will Grant land these men? Now that he can cross there's no Confederates on the other side of the Mississippi River that Grant really has to worry about. So Grant now has figured out a way to get his army on the dry land of Mississippi south of Vicksburg. Now the question then becomes, where will the army land? And by the way, this is the biggest amphibious invasion before D-Day in U.S. history. Grant is able to transport nearly 40,000 men across the Mississippi River into the state of Mississippi. Huge undertaking. And what Grant does, he can't quite, because he doesn't know the territory that well, he doesn't quite know where the best place to land his army in Mississippi is. And so what he does is he has a small company of Union soldiers cross into Mississippi, row across the Mississippi River, and they kidnap a couple of slaves. And they bring the slaves back. The slaves are given their freedom, and Grant meets with them personally, and he says to them, where should we land? And the slaves give Grant tremendous information, tremendous intelligence. And they say, look, if the best place probably for you to land is you should march your army a little bit further south to this place called Bruinsburg, and then you should cross the Mississippi River there. And that's what Grant does. So the key thing is that Grant starts, and you can see it on the map here, he starts crossing his army across the Mississippi River at this place called Bruinsburg, south of Vicksburg, on April 30th, 1863. This is a huge moment because Grant now is able to get his army across the Mississippi River onto the dry land south of Vicksburg. And now he can move. Now he can move. He'd been stymied up to this point, but he's figured out how to get his army in a position now where it can attack Vicksburg.